Psalm 27 is the psalm for these days of awe, and it asks just one thing, Achad Sha'alti, that we be able to dwell in the house of the holy forever. Which begs the question, what is the house of the holy? I love the BHA sanctuary, even though I haven't been there in quite a while, but I don't think that's the house of the holy. And I've been to the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, and that's an incredible place, but I don't think that's really the house of the holy. And even these woods and forests where I feel so at home, I don't think those are entirely the house of the holy either. I think the house of the holy is ultimately that place in our own memory, in our own heart, where we feel safe and warm, where we feel embraced by the fullness of divine presence, even if we wouldn't articulate it in those words, even if we don't quite remember it, it's so far back in our unconscious memory. But these days of awe are a journey of tshuva, a journey of return to a place we've been, with more fullness and more complexity. And we'll talk more about that, but the first of the shofar blasts is the Tekiyah, that full blast, that blast of shalem, of completeness, of fullness, that enables us to feel shalom, or peace. In just a moment, Cantor Ellen is going to lead us in the chanting of Achad Sha'alti. And while she does, I invite you to conjure in your mind, conjure in your consciousness, that place where you feel warm and safe, that place where you feel protected, that place that is for you the house of the holy. After Ellen leads us in the chanting, we'll hear from BHA member Donna Minkowitz reflecting on her own personal sense of the holy. Donna is an award-winning journalist who lives here in Beacon with her wife.
Achad sha'alti me'et Adonai, ota avakesh. Achad sha'alti me'et Adonai, ota avakesh. Shivti beveit Adonai, kol yamei chayai, lachasot benoam, benoam Adonai, ulvaker vehechalo. Lachasot benoam, benoam Adonai, ulvaker vehechalo. Achad sha'alti me'et Adonai, ota avakesh. Achad sha'alti me'et Adonai, ota avakesh. Shivti beveit Adonai, kol yamei chayai, lachasot benoam, benoam Adonai, ulvaker behechalo. Lachazot benoam, benoam Adonai, ulvaker behechalo.
Hi, I want to talk to you about my own experience of the holy. I've been experiencing the world as deeply holy since I was about 9 years old. And when I say I've experienced it as holy, I don't mean I have always experienced it as safe or welcoming. On the contrary, when I first felt the holiness of the world, it was at a time when my childhood family life had gotten frightening. I don't know if it was primarily as a means of escape that I first perceived the universe at around 9 years old as beautifully, deeply holy in itself, shot through with a radiant joy that made me happy. I knew that something would always continue to exist, no matter what happened, and that fact made me happy too. J.R.R. Tolkien was once writing about the accusation that fantasy literature was escapist, and he said, "Why should a man be scorned if, finding himself in prison, he tries to get out and go home? Or if, when he cannot do so, he thinks and talks about other topics than jailers and prison walls?" So I think it was for me when I was a kid. And I believe it was comforting for me to experience something like the beauty and the self healing constancy of the universe at a time when my family life was violent and the opposite of grounding. I have sometimes felt disturbed when considering this dichotomy, both then and now, I think. Sometimes I've wondered if the more ecstatic side of my religious feelings was just an artifact of traumatic dissociation, literally a kind of mechanical response of the psyche, a clinical symptom of the urge to get out. But now I think that was the wrong question to ask, because the fact of the matter is that in my childhood at least, my sense of the holy did ground me. And if it was a response of my psyche, I think it was a profoundly healthy one. More recently, at 56, I still feel holiness often, but I no longer feel like I'm escaping anything when I feel those sensations. Instead, I feel more like I'm going deeply into something, more deeply into the world or into more intimacy with life, rather than finding a way out. It is a privilege to be able to go more deeply into life without fear, and I am very grateful for it. Shana Tova.
You know, what I really appreciate about what Donna shared there about that sense of finding that place of the holy is how much it is in the finder, not in the place, right? That this idea of locating a place that is safe and warm is not necessarily because it's responding to outside circumstances, though that matters to some degree. It's that effort to find a place and build a place that is warm, even in our own minds. And I love that quote she brought from Tolkien. That sense of, okay, you're in jail. Of course, you want to go somewhere else in your mind, and the ability of the mind to go somewhere else and even build somewhere else is an amazing thing.
Yeah, that is powerful. Thank you, Donna. The next thing we will be moving to is Misod Zochrenu, which is part of the Amidah. And the melody here is something that is so haunting and so beautiful when it talks about opening up our lips. And so as a community, the one thing for me that is holding me together is just imagining all of you, hearing your voices singing. And as we sing Zochrenu L'chaim, and we know that the end of each is the word Chaim, we add life to this. We bring ourselves together as community through the music. So we will now hear Misod.
We come now to the Amidah in the spirit of Shavarim, separation and distinction. In the opening words of the Amidah, we give thanks to the God of our patriarchs and matriarchs Elohei Abraham, Elohei Sarah, and so on. But our ancestors give us more than their understanding of God. They gave us the tools to cultivate our own understanding of the divine. Now, we all have ancestors. For some of us, they're the people whose DNA we carry. For others of us, they're other people who raised us and loved us and brought us into adulthood. For others of us, they are teachers and mentors and coaches and guides who helped us along our way. Whoever our ancestors might be, our job is to inherit them and transcend them. Martin Buber tells the story of Reb Noach, who became the leader of the Solanomer Chassids after the death of his father, Reb Mordechai. Now, Reb Noach didn't do things quite the way his father did. For some prayers, he preferred to stand where his father would sit. For some prayers, he preferred to be outside when his father preferred to be inside. For some of his learning, he preferred to learn some of the Kabbalah instead of some of the Talmud. And his chassids were outraged. They said, Reb Noach, what are you doing? Why aren't you doing what your father did? And Reb Noach looked at them utterly perplexed. He said, what are you talking about? I'm doing exactly what my father did. My father searched his heart to understand how he and the men and women of his generation could best serve the divine. And so too, I search my heart to understand how best I and the men and women of our generation can serve the divine. I do exactly what my father did. We need to learn from our ancestors and also differentiate ourselves from them. This is part of the work of Shavarim, separation. When Ellen chants the beginning of the Amidah, I invite you to conjure in your mind the face of one of your ancestors and consider 3 attributes of theirs that you want to consciously and deliberately bring with you into this new year. And then I want to invite you to think about 3 attributes of theirs that you deliberately and consciously want to leave behind in this year that has passed. After Ellen concludes chanting, we'll hear from BHA member Sergio Perez some thoughts on the things we take and the things we leave behind from our ancestors. Sergio teaches art here at Beacon High School and lives in Beacon with his wife Lauren and their children Atticus and Sochi.
Misot Chachamim uvonim umilemed dat mevinim Heftecha pi בתפילה ובתחנונים לחלות ולחנן פני מלך מלכי המלכים ואדוני האדונים זוכרנו לחיים מלך חפץ בחיים וכתבנו בספר החיים למענך אלוהים חיים זוכרנו לחיים מלך חפץ בחיים וכתבנו בספר החיים למענך אלוהים חיים מלך עוזר ופוקד ומושיע ומגן ברוך אתה אדוני מגן אברהם ופוקד שרה
Hi, my name is Sergio Perez. Thanks for letting me share my thoughts on separation and distinction with you. Despite growing up in a military household, in our home, my mother always spoke of and encouraged the idea that everything was up for discussion and reflection. Indeed, our shared in our shared Jewish heritage, situations arose where ancestors debated, discussed, and recorded these instances. Over time, it became clear that further reflection, consideration, um, compelled us to act on what no longer served us or brought value to a given situation. As an educator, I frequently consider the intent and values I bring to my work, and I'm grateful to my own teachers and mentors from the past who have supported me on my path. Over the years, though, there are many times where it's become clear that some lessons and approaches uh, need to be let go or re-examined in favor of the needs of a given class or group of students. Indeed, if shared learning as a whole is to be transcendental over the transactional, it demands it. One outdated belief that was imparted to me, uh, you know, by my family, some parts of my family, and deserves to be let go, was the old saying that children should be seen and not heard. And I would argue that now more than ever, that creating space for youth to use their very separate and distinct voices at home, school, in their communities, can only strengthen our approach, um, our shared approach to progress and challenges, both presently and in the future. I wish you a happy and healthy new year. Hashana Tova.
So I really appreciated what Sergio brought there, that sense of both structure and flexibility. You know, he talked about growing up in a military family, and I know he traveled around a lot as as being a kid in a military family, and how that structure is both valuable for him, but also can be overmuch, particularly when it comes to children, and how he's had to, from that place of structure, grow and develop a more flexible understanding of education and working with children. And I think that sense of, all right, this is what I learned from my childhood, and here are some really great things I want to bring with me, and here are the things I want to leave behind, I think is vital work for understanding our own journeys of growth from where we are to where we hope to be.
It's difficult work too, things that have been ingrained for so long
Yeah.
that we have to really, really examine, go deep.
Well, I think
Examine those.
I think that examine part is exactly it, because I think most of the time, um, you know, I've never robbed a liquor store. I've never done something where it's obvious on the face of it. This is obviously a sin. This is obviously a terrible idea. It's stuff, it's patterns, it's way of acting that emerge out of frameworks. And often I don't even recognize the frameworks I have until I look at them. And this next bit of the liturgy, El Orech Din, is very much about that sense of judgment, and not judgment in, you know, I think for a lot of folks, judgments, I don't want to be judgmental, but that sense of really taking stock of who we are and really coming to see the paradigms and frameworks that undergird our seemingly natural or obvious responses. I think that's a lot of what we're going to hear in El Orech Din, and God willing, what we'll hear from Dan Tanaka when he reflects on that piyut. These are days of judgment. Pop psychology tells us not to judge, to accept everything and everyone exactly as they are. Which is good advice in some ways, but at another level, it's patently absurd. Of course we judge all the You can find it directly on the YouTube channel. These are days of judgment. Pop psychology tells us not to judge, to accept everything and everyone exactly as they are. Which is good advice in some ways, but at another level, it's patently absurd. Of course we judge all the time. Should I listen to Burna Boy or to Bruce Springsteen? Should I eat pizza or salad? Should I spend my time this way or that way? The real challenge isn't whether or not we judge or don't judge, or even whether or not we judge on superficial or meaningful levels. The real challenge is whether or not we judge other people or we judge ourselves. It's actually judging ourselves and taking an accounting of who we are and who we want to be that the Jewish tradition asks of us in this season of the Days of Awe. It's called a cheshbon hanefesh, literally an accounting of the soul. And it's how we come to understand how we've succeeded and how we've fallen short in being the person that we want to be. Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz of blessed memory talked about the process of tshuva as responding to a spiritual disquiet, a sense that somehow we are not the right people in the right place and right time. We have a sense of misalignment with the world around us. As we move into this next piyut, Le'el Orech Din, I invite all of us to look at ourselves, look at the ways we've succeeded, and perhaps more challengingly, look at the ways we've failed. And look at the ways in which we've come up short, in which we're not the people we wish to be. And look at ourselves with compassionate curiosity. Because it's often the case that when I say I'm trying to achieve this goal, and I'm not achieving this goal, it's because I actually have some other goal unstated that I'm not even articulating, and I'm succeeding in reaching that goal. If we can come to our behaviors, our actions with a sense of compassionate curiosity and say, I wonder why I'm acting that way. What needs of mine am I meeting by acting this way, even though it's clearly causing me pain in that way? We can begin to understand how we can act better. Let me offer this simply. I, like many of us, have struggled with eating right and maintaining my body in a healthy way. And for a long time, I would try to eat healthy and fail, and try to eat right and fail. And I came to understand that what was failure with the goal of eating healthy was actually success for the goal of finding comfort and reassurance in moments of stress. As I began to think, I have a need for comfort and reassurance in moments of stress. That's a totally legitimate goal. Can I achieve that goal in a more healthy way than 4 or 5 Twinkies in the middle of the night? Then I found ways of both meeting my need for comfort and reassurance and also taking care of my body in a healthier way. So as we find the things that we are doing that are causing us pain, causing the people in our lives pain, it might be fruitful to ask ourselves, what needs of mine am I actually meeting with this behavior? And is there a healthier way of meeting that need and not causing myself and the others around me pain? That is the work of doing a cheshbon hanefesh, an accounting of the soul. So as Cantor Ellen leads us in Le'el Orech Din, I invite us to come to our own lives with that spirit of compassionate curiosity. And afterward, we'll hear from BHA member Dan Tanaka on what's involved in doing that sort of cheshbon hanefesh. Dan is a core member of the BHA security team, a military veteran, and a former financial planner. He lives here in Beacon with his wife Sienna and their daughters Shay and Madison.
Levochen levavot beyom din legole amukot badin ledover misharim bayom din leho ותיק ועושה חסד ביום דין, לזוכר בריתו בדין, לחומל מסף ביום דין, לטהר חוסף בדין, ליודע מחשבות ביום דין, לחובש כעסו בדין, ללובש צדקות ביום דין, למוחל עוונות בדין, לנורת תהילות ביום דין, לסולח למוסף בדין, לעונה לקרב ביום דין, לפועל רחמיו בדין, לצופה נסתרות ביום דין, לקונה עבדיו בדין, לרחם עמו ביום דין, לשומר אוהביו בדין, לתומך תמימיו ביום דין.
Shana Tova. My name is Daniel, or Daniel in Hebrew, meaning God is my judge. It almost seems to let me off the hook in this exercise, leaving it up to God to judge. But I've learned the hard way that clear-eyed self-judgment is one of the most important tasks we must undertake in order to achieve personal and spiritual growth. How can I know what needs changing if I do not honestly and accurately perceive who I really am, warts and all? My ego is both a partner and an adversary in this process of self-discovery. When harnessed by my higher self, my ego can help explore and discern between the aspects of self which truly serve me, my community, my family, and God, and the aspects of self which are purely self-serving, practicing only self-gratification. How often are we connected to and operating from our higher selves, though? Most often, my ego makes excuses for and rationalizes my self-serving behaviors, deluding myself in pure defensiveness. In short, my ego can be a tool for self-knowledge or a slippery weasel of self-deception. How to grapple with this conundrum then? How do I get honest with myself about myself? I believe there are 3 essential keys to getting started: humility, intention, and prayer. By humility, I mean keeping our ego's right size in relation to God and the world. In this exercise, False humility is just as much of an impediment as the overinflated sense of our own importance. We are neither in the gutter nor up on the pedestal. Right size is the goal. By intention, or kavanah, I mean setting a sincere direction of the mind and heart to be open to know the truth about ourselves. Lastly, by prayer, I mean sincerely asking for assistance from Hashem in this undertaking. This can take many different forms, but when I do it, it usually sounds something like, God, please help me to uncover and see clearly my defects of character. Grant me the knowledge of your will for me and the power to carry it out. After a minute or two of concentration and listening, pick up a pen and put it to paper. You might be surprised what you learn about yourself.
So, what I really appreciated about what Dan said there is that aspect of self-judging and having a clear sense of self. And I feel like it's tied to what we were talking about at the beginning of this, about what do you do with pain and how do you sit there with pain? Because I think oftentimes we freak out when we come close to recognizing something about ourselves. Oh my God, I'm so horrible, right? And we freak out. And what we're really doing is like sending up emergency flares either to our own psyche or to someone else to come and save us and come and rescue us, right? I can't do this, right? It's like, a child looking at a shoelace that they don't know what to do with. I don't know what to do, I don't know what to do. And actually, I think cultivating, and this is what I think Marcella was talking about, that practice of being like, oh, hey, your thighs hurt when you sit that way. Cool. Spend some time with that hurt. That's where your work is. I think when we do that, what Dan is talking about, this project of self-judgment, we often discover things that we don't like. We discover we're short-tempered or insecure or, whatever. We discover those things. And if we don't have the capacity to sit with that discomfort, we freak out and do things to comfort ourselves, either numb ourselves, do things to comfort ourselves, or ask other people, usually implicitly, to comfort us, right? Oh my God, I'm so terrible, I'm so terrible. What I'm really saying is I want you to say, you're not so bad, you're not so bad, right?
Right.
And I think to do that sort of self-judgment that Dan is talking about requires being like, oh, hey, okay, you know what? When it comes down to it, I can be sort of short-tempered. I don't have patience. Let me just absorb that for a year or two and recognize that, and then be mindful and deliberate about what steps I can take to make that better. But the first thing I have to do is be comfortable with the discomfort of my own failings so that I don't freak out and look for cheap comfort from other sources.
And I think also to, in that process, to have compassion on yourself and knowing that there are those moments where sitting in that space, but to always have compassion to help us get through that in a kinder way. Yeah.
Yeah. So on a quick technical note before Ellen introduces the next pute, through the wonders of our technological setup, we can see your chats up here on this little device. We can't respond as easily onto this, but we can actually see your chats up here. And if everything works as it should, which it always does, we can see them here and then actually respond conversationally. So thanks to everyone who's making use of the chats. And I'll leave it to the incredible Michael and Michael team to deal with the volume level questions.
Okay, so we're moving on to the next liturgical piece, Avinu Malkeinu. And I think this is one when we hear those words, oh, Avinu Malkeinu. This idea of Avinu Malkeinu, the new of us, of community. This is about coming together as community. And I know that when I'm standing at the ark, at the very last part of it, that last line that we sing, it's the time when I stop singing. And it's the time when I listen to your voices and the beauty of the community as we sing together. And this idea of the conjugation being in the new, meaning our, I think this brings for me community. And so when you are listening to this, don't just listen, but really sing. Let's sing together as community, Avinu Malkeinu.
Perhaps you've spent the last year reflecting on yourself, making amends with all of the people in your life, volunteering, donating to causes that matter to you, and all in all becoming a better person. Or perhaps you've spent the past year narcissistically self-involved, doing just what feels right for you, regardless of what pain or havoc it wreaks in the lives of the people around you. At one level, it makes a huge difference how you've spent the last year. And at another level, it doesn't actually matter at all. If you've been virtuous and righteous and done all of the right things, your time on this earth will be limited and you one day will pass. And if you've been a wicked, horrible person, your time on this earth is limited and you one day will pass. This is the reality of being human, and it is in some ways a heartbreaking reality. This is what Rabbi Alan Liu of blessed memory is talking about when he writes, "Heartbreak is precisely the feeling that we have done our best, we have given it our all, but it hasn't been enough, not nearly enough. And this is what we mean when we say, God is close to the brokenhearted. And this is what we mean when we say, Ein banu ma'asim, we have no good deeds. This is what it says in Avinu Malkeinu, that lovely song with the haunting, heartbreaking melody we love to sing so much on Rosh Hashana. Avinu Malkeinu, Chanenu v'anenu. Our Father, our King, be gracious to us, be gratuitously loving, and answer us, even though we don't deserve it. Ki ein banu ma'asim. For we have no good deeds to invoke in our own defense. There's nothing we can do that can guarantee we will get what we want. Once we absorb the absurdity of birth and the inevitability of death, we realize there is really nothing we can do about it. All of our deeds are limited at best. We have greatly overestimated our potency and our cleverness. We've overestimated the efficacy of our conscious efforts, and we've underestimated the unconscious havoc we wreak in our lives and the lives around us. Our attempts to do good are very small compared to the pain we inevitably cause every day. In order to really grow, we have to incorporate an awareness of our own ultimate powerlessness, our own inability to shape the outcomes we want on the things that really matter. We can't make our children what we want them to be. We can't make our parents what we want them to be. We can't make our spouses what we want them to be. Maybe, with tremendous effort and unbelievable luck, we can make ourselves a little closer to the people we want to be. This isn't nihilism. We can and should put in effort and make wise use of technology and learning and the resources human society has developed to make our lives on this earth better. But ultimately, our powers are limited. Science and technology, and I mean all of technology, not just the computers and the gadgets, language, philosophy, psychology, all human endeavors can do tremendous things to alleviate suffering, but they can't cure everything. This is a painful and in some way liberating truth. There are limits to what we can do for better and for worse. So here is my perhaps painful invitation to you. While Ellen chants Avinu Malkeinu, I invite you to contemplate a desire you have, something real and deep, something that matters, hopes you have for your children, hopes you have for your parents, hopes you have for your own desires for partnership and connection. And sit for a moment with the painful reality that it might not work out the way you want. You might notice, as I do, an intense desire to fix, to change, to improve, to rail against the dark night and make things better. And that is a laudable impulse, but it has its limits. There's only so much we can do. We need to do all we can do and recognize there's a gap between what we can do and what we want to make happen. After Cantor Ellen leads us in the chanting of Unatana Tokef, we'll hear some thoughts and reflections on the blessings and limits of human power from BHA member David Ross. David is the chair of the Department of Art Practice of School for Visual Arts in Manhattan and lives here in Beacon with his wife Peggy.
Avinu Malkeinu, Chatanu lefanecha, Boreinu mevarcheinu, En lanu melech ela ata. Go aleinu meshamreinu, Aseh imanu lema'an shemecha, Dorshenu mefars naseinu, Chadesh alenu shana tova, Hodenu Moshienu, Betel me aleinu, Kol gezerot kashot. Vatikenu mefaltenu, Batel machashavot sonenu. Avinu Malkeinu, Kotvenu b'Sefer Chaim Tovim. Avinu Malkeinu, Kotvenu b'Sefer Geula Vishua. Avinu Malkeinu, Kotvenu b'Sefer Parnasa v'Chalkala. Avinu Malkeinu, Kotvenu b'Sefer Zchuyot. Avinu Malkeinu, Kotvenu b'Sefer Selicha u'Mchila. Avinu Malkeinu, Chanenu v'anenu. Avinu Malkeinu, Chanenu v'anenu, Ki ein banu maasim. Aseh imanu, tzedakah v'chesed. Aseh imanu, tzedakah v'chesed, v'hoshienu. Avinu Malkeinu, Chanenu v'anenu. Avinu Malkeinu, Chanenu v'anenu, Ki ein banu maasim. Aseh imanu, Aseh imanu tzedaka v'chesed v'hoshienu.
I'm no interest in defying death. I don't find that as a failure of any kind. I'm just a biological organism, and I have X amount of time on the planet, and I do what I can while I'm here for any number of reasons, including the fact that it's just what I do as an animal. I get up every day and I do things, and I have a moral perspective that comes from somewhere inside me, which is probably relates to the notion of tikkun, which is that I do believe that a good day is a day where I've repaired the world a little bit. And so I take that kind of approach to life. I don't think my power has to go any further than that. I think as a grain of sand in this giant universe, I have a completely reasonable understanding of what role my presence on Earth at this moment in time, in geological and cosmological time, means, which is just a little blip, a BB fired against the battleship of time. There's nothing. If we're really quiet, we can hear the ping of the BB bouncing off of the hull, but we're not quiet, so we basically don't even hear that sound of our little effort. There's a painter, her name is Agnes Martin. She was a wonderful minimalist painter, and I was once visiting her studio, and she made these paintings that were just straight lines, beautifully painted straight lines on a canvas. And she said, the happiest days of my life is when these paintings leave my studio and they have their own lives. And I thought, that's the way most parents should feel about their children. The happiest day is when they leave home and have full lives of their own. It means that you've made a good painting. You've made a good child. They have their own lives. They're not dependent on you for their life. They connect with you. They're still part of you, but you've launched them into the world, and now they have their own life. You've made a good painting. You don't measure success by box office. It's not how many imprints that picture made that means it's success. It may have a much easier to find impact on the world, but I'm someone who truly believes that the obscure artist, the obscure poet, the obscure musician who makes a work of art and leaves it to the world has done absolutely as much as the one who has found fame either in his or her lifetime or through the magic of art history, has been discovered and whose work has been treasured and collected and conserved and shown generation after generation.
So I really appreciated that phrase of David's. Our lives are like a little BB shot against the side of the battleship of time. And if we're quiet, we can maybe hear a little ping, but we're not quiet. And that sense of big time and big history is actually something I find simultaneously spiritually terrifying, but also reassuring. The idea that the earth has existed for billions of years. I go hiking and I look at the Hudson River and I think, my grandfather hiked these trails and looked at this river 100 years ago, and that's nothing. The river's been there for millennia. And a certain sense of the tremendousness of time and the tremendousness of natural history helps me sometimes put my own reality in perspective. I'm not shaping things over millennia. I'm not shaping mountains. I am doing the best I can, loving the people in my orbit. That's it. And on the one hand, it's disheartening, right? Because there's part of me that wants to make that big effort and change the world and do all those incredible things. And there's part of me that finds it very reassuring to say, I just need to be patient like a tree. I need to be rooted here and nurturing and loving to the people here. That's all I have to do. And when it comes down to it, that's all I really can do anyway. And if I can do that right, it is a life very well spent. That's it. That's all I can do.
I related to that also what David said about that. I have a postcard actually from Pete, who sent me this postcard of the universe, and it says, "You are here." This teeny little dot in this huge universe. And it reminded me of a teacher here at the synagogue, long time ago, Hyman Siegel, who also used to repair the roof. And we would drive in the morning, and he would remind us from the roof, Lo alecha hamlacha ligmor, right? You can't do it all. But we have to do our part, and our part together creates the whole.
Yeah.
And yeah. So that was, thank you, David. So we're going to continue with the 13 attributes. To me, this is really also about community coming together and community reciting before the ark this plea, this idea of compassion and love. And I see this as I'm looking at this, our community here on the screen, but looking at you with compassion and love and all of these attributes. And so let us sing together the 13 attributes.
When it comes down to it, the entirety of these days of awe are about essentially trying to turn us into slightly better people in the coming year than we were in the year that is past. We're trying to turn ourselves into mention, decent, upright people who can forgive and be forgiven. It's not easy work figuring out how to do that, how to change ourselves, how to work on ourselves. But this is something that within the Jewish tradition we've been struggling with for a long time. And one of the most vital works on this is called the Tomer Devorah, written by Rabbi Moses Cordovero, a central medieval Kabbalist. And in the Tomer Devorah, Rabbi Cordovero, more commonly known as the Ramak, expands on the verse that we know as Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum Vechanun. And he breaks it down like this. He says what that is saying is Adonai, Adonai, full of mercy and compassion. And Adonai is what keeps us alive at every moment. The divine flow of Shefa, of life energy into the world, is why I breathe and we talk and the world spins on its axis. That is the presence of divine energy in the world. And even at the moments when we are acting disgracefully, when we are doing wicked things, when we are doing things that debase the name of the Holy One, even in those moments, the Holy One is holding us up with the breath of life. We demand endless patience from the Holy One, like a child who you lovingly hand some applesauce to, and they throw it on the floor. And you offer some applesauce, and they throw it in your face. And you offer some applesauce, and down it goes again. At every moment, the Holy One is offering us, supporting us with the applesauce of life, the breath of life. And we use it for things it shouldn't be used for. And yet the Holy One treats us with tremendous forgiveness and tremendous patience. The Ramak goes on to say, if the Holy One can be patient with us as the Holy One is keeping us alive, surely we can work to imitate the Holy and be patient with the other people in our lives who we are not holding up, who we are not giving life force energy to for them to act in behaving in frustrating ways. This is, of course, easier said than done. But this ability to have patience and really forgiveness is at the core of what it is to do tshuva over these days of awe. To forgive is to hold on to the future more tightly than we hold on to the past. In just a moment, Cantor Ellen is going to lead us in the chanting of the Shlosh Esrei Midot, those 13 attributes. And afterward, we'll hear from BHA member Christine Pincus on some of these dynamics of patience and forgiveness. Christine is one of the core volunteers at BHA. Back when we could get into our building, was one of the people who made sure that the kitchen was clean and our space was usable. And she lives in Fishkill with her husband Aaron, who's a member of the BHA board, and their children Seth and Rhea.
Adonai, Adonai, El Rachun Bechanun, Erech Apayim, Verav Chesed V'Yemet, Notzer Chesed Le'alafim, Nosei Avon V'Pesha, V'Chata V'Nakeh. Adonai, Adonai, El Rachun V'Chanun, Erech Apayim, V'Rav Chesed V'Yemet, Notzer Chesed Le'alafim, Nosei Avon V'Pesha, V'Chata V'Nakeh. Adonai, Adonai, El Rachun V'Chanun, Erech Apayim, V'Rav Chesed V'Yemet, Notzer Chesed Le'alafim, Nosei Avon V'Pesha, V'Chata V'Nakeh.
Patience is another form of empathy. It's attempting to understand another person and their point of view and their actions, and accept that they may not align with your own. Simply shouting or getting angry with someone isn't going to solve anything. It only serves to diminish their opinion of you and harden their position in what they're doing. It won't educate them about your point of view, and you need to have the humility to understand that you're not the only one, and you may not be right. Practicing patience is far easier with strangers than with someone you know. When you know somebody,
All right, so it seems like maybe we've hit a little bit of a technological snag, which is inevitable, and in fact, totally relevant to what Christine was teaching us about, which is this aspect of patience and compassion, right? And I can, even as we're sitting here, recognize in myself feelings of frustration coming up. Wait, we've been working so hard. We've been doing this. We've been here till 10 o'clock. Why isn't everything working perfectly? And as I'm noticing those feelings arising in myself, right, this is a moment of saying, okay, right, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. This is a moment when Christine is showing up as my teacher and saying, okay, how's that frustration going to work at you? I have years of experience of yelling at computers. I have a perfect 0 success rate. Televisions, occasionally, if you hit them a little bit, something can happen, but computers, nothing. So I can get frustrated, or I can sit here and say, okay, this isn't working the way I wanted to, and trust that things will sort out
Michael will sort them out, or they won't be sorted out and we'll move on. And lo and behold, our services will be imperfect.
This is part of Teshuvah, isn't it?
This is the work.
This is the work we need to do. So everybody, we can sit here and do this work right now.
Yeah.
Do the Teshuvah. Just sitting.
So it sounds like maybe the thing to do right now is to move forward onto our next clip. I will just remind everyone that exactly for technological snafus like this, all of these clips are available on the BHA YouTube channel. So you can access them either by going to YouTube and finding BHA, or in the email that Faith sent out earlier this morning. There's a link in there. So even things that we lose in this setup, they are still available to us for our growth and learning. And certainly I know for me, the Torah that Christine Pincus is bringing about patience, and patience as a form of empathy, is Torah that I again and again need to learn. But we're going to move on from here to the next bit of the liturgy, which is Min HaMetzar. Do you want to say a word or two about that, Ella?
So Min HaMetzar, part of the shofar service, really talks about those narrow places, right? The narrow straits that we call out from. And this is really the part of community when we come together. We sing those lines, and then I sing a little bit, and we always come back to that Min HaMetzar, Karatiya. And so as we play this, as we listen, sing out from those places. Let's sing out, let's bring our voices together as part of community and fill those narrow straits with the voice of song, with the power of song.
We now transition in our davening from the 3 separate blasts of Shavarim to the 9 shattering blasts of Truah. We make this transition in our lives as well. As we make our journey through life, part of our work is to separate from our parents and mentors and come to learn who we are separate from anyone else. But life deals us not only separation, but shattering pain as well. We will inevitably experience events that strain us, stress us, and ultimately shatter us. Collectively, we all have gotten sick. We have buried our loved ones. We have gone bankrupt. We have gotten divorced. We have been betrayed, and we have betrayed others. We have suffered pain and fear so intense that if we hadn't already lived through it, we wouldn't have thought that we could. So we cry out in rage and fear, crying into our pillows, hoping for relief or simple acknowledgement of our pain. The liturgy brings this line from Psalm 118, Min HaMetzar karatiya va'anani b'merchavya. I reached out, I cried out from the narrow place, and you responded to me from a wide place, a place of expanse. Some years ago, when my wife Allison was in the ICU, I was in as narrow a place as I have ever been in. She was seriously ill with leukemia. Our financial problems were mounting with a loss of income and huge medical bills. And my children were terrified every day, terrified of what they knew, with no awareness of how much worse things could have gotten. And one night, as I sat in my living room, scared out of my mind, I literally called out. I called a dear friend and was so panicked and fearful that when he picked up the phone, I couldn't speak. I could only sob. Less than 10 minutes later, that friend showed up on my porch. It must have been 11:30 at night. He showed up on my porch with a shoulder to cry on and a good bottle of whiskey. And he sat there with me and just let me cry and be afraid. And he kept holding my shoulders and pouring me whiskey. Min ha-metzar karatia ve'anani b'merchavya. Perhaps you've also felt pain. Perhaps you've also been afraid. Perhaps you've also been shattered. And perhaps in your moments of pain, you too have cried out and you too have been answered. Perhaps the answer hasn't been as full as you want, as complete as you want, as reassuring as you want. But perhaps someone was willing and able to walk with you on your journey, sit with you in your fear, hold your hand, and when needed, pour you a stiff drink. I want to invite you, while Ellen leads us in chanting the davening, to call to mind the face of someone who has been with you on your journey, been with you in your pain, and simply acknowledge them. Acknowledge them in your heart, and if you're so moved, pick up the phone and acknowledge them in conversation. This too is part of the work of tshuva. After Ellen concludes chanting, we'll hear some thoughts from BHA member Karen Rosenbaum. Karen is a clinical and forensic psychiatrist in practice in New York and lives here in Beacon with her dog Macy.
Min ha-metzar karatia anani b'merchavya. Min ha-metzar karatia anani b'merchavya. Koli shamata al talem az necha leravchati leshavati Rosh devarcha emet ulolam kol mishpat tzidkecha min ha-metzar karatia ani b'merchavya. Arov avdecha latov al ya'ashkuni zedim. Sas anochi al imratecha kemotze shalal rav. Min ha-metzar karatia ani v'merchavya. Tuv ta'am v'da'at lamdeni ki v'mitzvotecha he'emanti nidvot piretzena Adonai umishpatecha lamdeni. Min ha-metzar karatia anani v'merchavya. Min ha-metzar karatia anani v'merchavya.
Thank you for letting me speak. I try not to turn down when people ask me for something that might be able to help others from my experiences, even though this is a bit of a difficult task. I hope that I can say something helpful for this new year. I like this idea, and I thank Rabbi Brent for telling us his inspiring story of how he was in a narrow place and called for help. And I relate to the idea of separation from family and figuring out how to be an independent, self-reliant person. I think for a long time, I relied too much on other people for my self-esteem and for validation. And I've called out from the narrow place many times with a lot of expectations. And I think until the last 6 or 7 years, after a pretty bad heartbreak that I had to get myself out of, I really figured out that that it's really about the relationship with myself and with God, even more than with relying on others. And that's also something I've had trouble with, asking for help, because I help others for a living and feel like I should be able to get myself out of things because I help other people out of things that are difficult and out of the narrow place for others. And I think that I've really had to figure out both how to let others help me and how to really listen to what I'm saying to other people and taking my own advice. And I've had to develop a lot of tools in the last few years, including meditation and relying on community, and BHA and Beacon has been a really big part of my journey. And I'm happy that I can speak with you today and that I was asked, and that I'm celebrating the new year with you, even though it's a bit untraditional. I think if we remember that we're all together in this and not alone, that's really helpful for me. And I really appreciate this opportunity. Thank you.
You know, something I really appreciated about what Karen said there is the way that she's learning this now. And I feel like we are used to looking at young children and seeing failure as a natural part of development. We don't even see it as failure, right? Of course, the kid stumbles before they can walk. Of course, the kid babbles before they can talk. But, you know, once we reach physical maturity, I guess, we think, or society thinks, we tell ourselves, we should have this together. We should be adulting now. And the awareness that the growth that happens inside ideally happens over a lifetime, right? And like you can see a kid go from little to big, but you can't necessarily see that growth on the inside in the same way. But as we mature, and I'll hasten to add, if we mature, because not everyone does that work, but if we mature, there will inevitably be stumbles along the way. There's no way to walk without crawling and falling. There's no way to talk without babbling. And there's no way to grow emotionally without collapsing. And sort of recognizing that that those falling shorts, those heartbreaks, those times are actually where we can learn from, I think is so central to what Karen is saying. And I think that's so much at the core of the work that I have to do and we all have to do. And it's what makes it hard, because falling down sucks. You don't want to do that. You want to just sail through things. But it's exactly where we stumble and fall that we have the opportunities for learning.
And it was interesting that Karen said about community, and community sort of helping us along the way. And I think about, you know, as a child, when you made a mistake, you weren't I feel more ashamed of making mistakes as an adult, figuring I should have it all, right? I've experienced life, I should have it all. And I remember my dad saying that each day is a new day, shehechianu, right? And each day we're going to stumble. We have new things that are presented to us, regardless of our age.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're going to move on here into B'Sefer Chaim, and we are as we're moving through our sonic map, right, of moving from that first cry of the shofar with Tekiah into Shvarim, into the separation. We're now in that third part of Truah, of the places of separation, the places of shattering. And we've been talking about some of the shattering that we're all facing on an individual level and the ways in which we experience and process our own shattering experiences individually. We're going to shift focus a little bit now as we move into Sefer Chaim and think and talk a little bit about some of the shattering that we're experiencing on a national and global level as well. So with that, we'll move into the next bit of davening with Sefer Chaim.
We pray over these days of awe that we be inscribed in the book of life, that we be inscribed for a year of peace and health and prosperity. But it's not enough for us to look out just for our own individual year and our own individual hopes for peace and health and prosperity, but to look at the state of our nation, and particularly the state of people of color in this country. I had the opportunity earlier this year to visit the National Memorial for Peace and Justice in Birmingham, Alabama, which is an extensive museum and memorial documenting America's history of domestic racial terrorism, from slavery through Jim Crow, from the KKK to the rise of white nationalists in the halls of power right now. And it was, in many ways, a confusing and disorienting experience for me to visit that museum. I've had the opportunity to visit Holocaust museums all around the world, Berlin, Washington, Jerusalem. And when I visit the Holocaust memorials, I have no ambiguity about who I am. I visit Auschwitz, I visit Yad Vashem in Jerusalem as a Jew, not as a German or a Pole. But walking those halls in Alabama, I wasn't quite sure where to locate myself. In some ways, of course, I have more in common with people of color in this country, subject to the violent whims of white Christianity. But in other ways, as a man with white skin, I have more in common, far more than I like to admit. I have far more in common with the oppressor than the oppressed. Generally speaking, as long as I abide by the social norms and dress in the right way and go to the right schools, I can walk the halls of power in this country unmolested as a Jew. It's a difficult thing for me to reckon with the ways in which I, as a Jewish person, am also a beneficiary of white supremacy. It's not privilege I ever looked for, it's not privilege I ever signed up for, and it's not privilege that I want. But it's mine nevertheless. I'm not worried about being incarcerated unjustly. I'm not worried about my neighborhood being redlined. I'm not worried about my children being shot by the police for, at worst, youthful indiscretions. But that is the reality for millions of people of color in this country. As we move forward into B'Sefer Chaim, which Ellen will chant for us in just a few moments, I invite us, particularly the white members of this community, to do the uncomfortable work of reflecting on the ways in which we have benefited from white supremacy without ever asking for it. I invite you to consider, are the municipal services in your neighborhood regularly maintained? Are the streets cleaned? Are the sewers clear of debris? Are there supermarkets or places to get fresh food and vegetables easily accessible to where you live? Have you inherited wealth in your family? Not tremendous sums of wealth, not Jeff Bezos sums of wealth, but did somebody own a house and be able to pass that on to the next generation? I know in my family, the fact that my grandfather was able to purchase an apartment in Brooklyn through the GI Bill enabled me and my brother in part to go to college. Out of the hundreds of thousands of mortgages that were signed by the GI Bill in the New York area, only 7 of them were issued to people of color. That is a function of white supremacy that I never signed up for, but from which I benefit. After Ellen leads us in B'Sefer Chaim, we'll hear from BHA member Mark Unger on some of the dynamics of white supremacy, particularly with regards to policing. Mark is a professor of political science and criminal justice at the CUNY Graduate Center in New York, and he also works with the United Nations on police reform around the world. He lives here in Beacon with his husband Bob and their son Dylan.
בספר חיים ברכה ושלום ופרנסה טובה נזכר ונכתב לפניך אנחנו וכל עמך בית ישראל לחיים טובים ולשלום בספר חיים ברכה ושלום ופרנסה טובה נזכר ונכתב לפניך אנחנו וכל עמך בית ישראל לחיים טובים ולשלום ברוך אתה אדוני עושה השלום.
Thank you, Brent and Ellen and everyone, for the opportunity to participate in our high holiday services this year. Of course, central to today is our collective hope for a year of peace, sustenance, and blessing. And it is good to remember that, like past years, it will be a year made up of moments and also bound up with centuries. Those moments happen when we make a new connection, venture beyond our usual radius, try to understand something with a more critical eye. So in our current effort to rid U.S. policing of racism, that means learning and looking together at each piece that comprises it. How police officers are trained, why police unions resist change, why prosecutors charge African Americans at higher rates and for lesser crimes, how community policing has worked, and what terms like broken windows and zero tolerance actually mean. Only by uncovering these basic building blocks can we actually begin to replace them. And there's also a process stretching out over generations. One Black Lives Matter organizer described it as a claim to recognize Black people's full humanity, which seems like a very long and painful process, extending back centuries, with each achievement feeling like a slippery rock under a powerful tide. But that long history shows us also that we can slowly shift those tides as well. My father tells me that at his bar mitzvah in 1939, as Nazism spread across Europe, his father spoke about stepping into a deep darkness with the light of Jewish history to get through it. From the 1960s and 1980s, we now see more clearly the contributions of the civil rights movement, the fights for women's equality, and LGBT rights. This fall, I am teaching a class on democratization for democratic activists from around the world, in countries as far-flung as Ukraine, Syria, and Burma. Many of them have been arrested, many are from ethnic minorities, but all of them have no doubt that future years will be ones of the peace, sustenance, and blessing we are now coming together to create, and how this moment is a moment that makes up centuries in the fight for humanity that allows such blessing and peace to be fully shared and to long endure. Thank you.
part of what well, there are two things I'm really taking away from what Mark is saying there. One is what he's saying, and the other is how he's saying it. What he's saying, the sense of that to really understand, to really work on white supremacy and structural racism in this country requires a certain critical analysis to understand what phrases like broken windows and zero tolerance mean, right? Which is in some ways doing on a societal level exactly what Dan Tanaka was talking about earlier, doing on an individual level. Individually, we need to look and see where we act in ways that cause pain and come to understand the narratives that undergird those actions. And so too on a national level, there's work to be done to say, where are the places where we're causing pain and what are the stories and narratives that exist underneath that? The other thing that really strikes me about what Mark shared here is less what he said and more how he said it. And I'm thinking particularly of Christine's teaching about patience and compassion. I don't know if everybody on the call knows Mark. Mark is brilliant and a soft-spoken gay Jewish man. And when you think, who should the United Nations send to Baghdad to help set up a police force in Baghdad? I don't know that most people's first thought would be a soft-spoken gay Jewish man. And yet that's exactly who the UN sent to Baghdad to help set up the police force there after the American occupation ended. And Mark's calm, grounded, patient demeanor is something that's always impressed me about Mark, and I imagine has served him well in his stressful situations, and I imagine would serve all of us. I know for me, so much of my work is cultivating that calm, gentle demeanor, which is not my first nature. And I'm struck again that Mark has used that demeanor and used his presence in settings that I would not imagine welcomed it, and yet he succeeded in those settings, I think exactly because of his gentleness and patience.
I remember riding in the car once with Mark to visit Judy, and me sort of being like this, and we stopped the car, and he just said, to get through things, we need to have that.
Yeah.
That has to be our foundation in order to move forward, to reach out, to create the change in society that we need. Yeah, so thank you, Mark.
All right.
Well, we now turn to Unatana Tokef.
On page 143 for folks
Page
with the
140.
Machzorim.
Yeah, sorry, not putting the pages in there. And this to me is such a powerful, powerful liturgical piece as we stand at the ark, and
Mom, I'm going to help you.
it calls us to really not only hear the big stuff, but the still small voices inside. And as community, we join in with Rosh Hashana Yikatevun, right? And there are things out of our control, mi yev and mi yamut, but this sense of coming back together to sing together and to be part of community, and then ending with Teshuvah, Tefillah, Tzedakah, that together through community, through these beautiful acts of Teshuvah, of Tzedakah, and through Tefillah, singing together, that we create the power that it gives us. So please sing with us.
Unatana Tokef is the defining piyut or poem of these holidays. It's where we reckon with our mortality, recognizing that everything ends. Who by fire, who by water, who by cancer, who by COVID. It's not just humans who are mortal though, but every human enterprise ultimately comes to an end. The Roman Empire lasted 1,480 years, and it ended. And the Ottoman Empire lasted 623 years, and it ended. The American Empire is only 244 years old, and our future is far from certain. In just a few weeks, we will take part in one of the central rituals of America, the election of our president. Voting and elections in America are far from perfect. Of course, originally, it was only white property-owning men who had the vote, and it was more than 50 years into the American experiment when we had a president who was anything other than a white supremacist slaveholder from Virginia. But thanks to the efforts of patriots like Susan B. Anthony and Martin Luther King, the franchise, the ability to vote for our leaders, was expanded so that more and more of our people could vote for our leaders. But despite those tremendous efforts, the future is far from certain. Who by fire and who by water? Who by virus mismanaged and who by elections stolen? Who by endemic racism and who by pervasive misogyny? Who by tin pot dictators and who by fouling the only planet on which we have to live? There is so much at stake in this election. And I invite us now, as we prepare to hear Unatana Tokef chanted by Ellen, to contemplate as a spiritual exercise what steps we're going to take to vote and what steps we're going to take after the election. I am planning on voting on Monday, October 26th at Fishkill Town Hall at 807 Route 52 in Fishkill. And I invite you to make a plan for how you're going to vote, whether that's voting early, voting by mail, or voting in person on November 3rd. But beyond that, I invite you to contemplate what steps you're prepared to take in the event that this election is disputed or undermined by our political leaders. Around the world, people take to the streets when it's clear that their leaders are failing them. And I invite you to consider what steps you are ready and willing to take to ensure that the best of America endures. All human enterprises come to an end, even nation states. But this doesn't have to be the time when America ends, and it certainly doesn't have to be the time when America ends without a struggle. As a spiritual exercise, what are you willing to do to preserve the best of America? I invite you to contemplate this as Cantor Ellen leads us in Unatana Tokef, and afterward, we'll hear some thoughts and reflections on these issues from Eli Karetny. Eli is a member of BHA and a professor of political science at Baruch College in Manhattan. He lives in Cold Spring with his wife, Tali, and their children, Nomi and Maayan.
Unatana Tokef kedushat hayom ki hu nora ve'hayom uvot tinaseh malchutecha vayichon v'chesed kisecha v'teshev alav be'emet emet ki ata hu dayan u'mochiach v'yodea v'ahed v'chotei v'sofer u'moneh v'tizkor kol hanishkachot v'tiftach et ze sefer hazichronot u'me'alav yikareh v'chotam yad kol adam bo ufshofar gadol yitaka v'kol demamad yishama b'rosh Hashana yikatevun Uvayom Tzom Kippur yikatevun בראש השנה יכתבון, וביום צום כיפור יכתבון. כמה יעברון וכמה יברעון. מי יהיה ומי ימות, מי בקיצו ומי לא בקיצו. מי באש ומי במים, מי בחרב ומי בחיה, מי ברעב ומי בצמא. בראש השנה יכתבון, וביום צום כיפור יכתבון. מי ברעש ומי במגפה, מי בחניקה ומי בסקילה. מי ינוח ומי ינוע, מי ישקיט ומי יטורף. בראש השנה יכתבון, וביום צום כיפור יכתבון. מי ישלב ומי יתייסר, מי יעני ומי יעשיר, מי יושפל ומי ירום. ותשובה ותפילה וצדקה מעבירים את רוח הגזירה. ותשובה ותפילה וצדקה מעבירים את רוח הגזירה.
The Unitani Tokef is a story about a rabbi who was dismembered by Gentile authorities after reconsidering conversion. His dying words have become part of Jewish liturgy during the high holidays. The rabbi's deathbed poem has been interpreted as a reminder of the inevitability of death and an invitation to reflect on what it is we believe in while we live. I thank Rabbi Brent for asking me to say a few words about how a dying body, a dying political body, opens new space for exploring what we collectively stand for. As the firstborn son of immigrants to this country, I grew up believing that America's founding principles offer hope to so many who seek a better life. While I continue to be grateful for the opportunities this country has provided my family, I've developed a more nuanced understanding of the tensions embedded in our communal body. These ever-present tensions, long simmering and periodically bubbling to the social surface, now threaten to erupt and destroy us from within. Watching this unfold in the context of a pandemic and protest movement fills me with fear and foreboding. I fear for the health of my body and my mind. I fear for the well-being of my family. And I fear that my country's ideals, never consistently applied and always privileging certain groups at the expense of others, are being betrayed by those who reject progress and diversity, those who seek to embolden the worst elements within our convulsing body politic. The America deserving of my family's love is being dismembered, destroyed. But so what? Maybe my childhood fantasies about the American dream were just beautiful lies meant to veil the ugly historical truths about white supremacy, labor exploitation, imperial domination. Shouldn't a country that masks its racism and oppression with democratic rhetoric be allowed to die, nay, be put to death? This view is just as one-sided as the counter-narrative I once fully embraced. The story my parents told me about our exceptional nation, a new promised land where freedom and opportunity are available for any and all. Both views contain elements of truth, and both views are wrong in their totalizing self-conception. As the blast from the shofar signals a call to the supreme source of all life and meaning, we open ourselves to the highest judgment. Will our collective journey continue? Does our social body deserve to live on? Are we confronted with the prospect of impending death? The America I was taught by my immigrant parents to believe in is dying, even though it never truly existed for so many. But the America I was taught by my professors turned colleagues to revolt against also never existed. The America deserving of our attachments declared its values at our birth, even though it never fully embodied them. Even as the American body confronts the death of its empire, the ideals of freedom and equality will live on. In these days of judgment, let us remember that finite bodies die, but our highest ideals endure. As we enter a new year, let us search within and without for ways to express and embrace those ideals. Shana Tova.
So that Torah that Eli brings, can you turn that down over there?
Yes.
That Torah that Eli brings is powerful and challenging, and understanding the gap, the tragic gap between the values we articulate and the values we live is a challenge for us individually, right? Just like that moment when I saw myself as a kind and patient and loving father, and I needed to confront the reality that I was screaming at my child for doing the monkey bars wrong. That's true on a national level as well. And recognizing the gap between the values we profess, the values we say are what makes America great, and the actual country we actually live in is a painful, painful process.
Mhm.
And we see it playing out in the body politic now, right? When critical inquiry into our history and understanding of where we come from is under increasing attack and is a convenient boogeyman for the fascist impulses in the White House and on down. And it can be easier and more attractive to cling to the symbols of America than the values of America. So we can wave the flag while we stamp on the necks of Black people, and we can, love the American eagle while denying what we're doing to all sorts of populations here in this country.
Mm.
And doing that work is really hard. And I think that these next couple of weeks are really going to require of us to get off of the sidelines and really understand what our commitment is to. Is our commitment to the symbols of America, or is our commitment to the values of America? Because I think that we're at a point where they're at very least divergent, and I suspect more openly in conflict with each other.
And I think when it comes to community, each of us plays a part. Each one of us must play a part in the collective whole of that, all of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we are going to introduce our next piyut, and it's one that musically sort of invigorates me. It's sort of towards the end of the service, and sometimes I see people schlumping a little as we get to the end. Not because it's boring or long, or it's just we begin to, and we need a little energy. Vayiknu lecha keter melucha. So if you're sitting there now and you're feeling schlumping a little, as we sing this, bring this energy, right? So v'keter melucha. So please just sing with us as we move into this piyut.
As we move through this section of Truah, or shattering, we come to one of the most ancient parts of the liturgy, a piyut known as Vayitnu Lecha Keter Melucha. we give to you, Keter, sovereignty. This poem dates back to the 7th century, and it's cryptic in some ways what it means. Vayitnu lecha Keter melucha. We give to you, Keter, sovereignty, which begs the question, what or who is Keter? In the Jewish mystical arena, Keter is the highest realm of the divine energy that flows into the world. It's the first pulsations of divine presence that leads to existence as we know it. It is, in essence, the love of the divine for humanity that sets all of creation in motion. And so when we chant, Vayitnu lecha Keter melucha, and we give to you, Keter, sovereignty, we are in essence saying, we give to you love, sovereignty. I invite you to contemplate for a moment what it would mean to have love as sovereign in your life. As the poet Bob Dylan says, everybody's got to serve someone. And I know in my life, sometimes I'm serving anger, oftentimes I'm serving impatience. What would it mean to serve love? And this isn't simply about saying nice things about love, though that's always a lovely thing to do. It's about serving love. Love isn't always easy. Love is work. Love is effort. Love is compromise. Love is devotion. Love is service. And I invite you to contemplate, as Ellen leads us in the chanting of Vayitnu lecha Keter melucha, what it would mean for you in your life, in your relationships, not simply to be open to love, not simply to be in favor of love, but to serve love, to work for love. After Ellen leads us in the chanting, we'll hear from BHA member Enid Schwartz on what it is to live a life in service of love. Enid lives here in the Hudson Valley with her husband Arnie, their adult children, Hara, Randy, Evan, Laura, Howard, and Chris, and their grandchildren, Oliver and Simon, Isabel, and Chloe.
ויאתיו כל עבדיך ויתנו לך כתר מלוכה ויברכו שם כבודך ויתנו לך כתר מלוכה ויגידו ואם צדקך ויתנו לך כתר מלוכה ידדי 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 ויסעדו וכי לפניך ויתנו לך כתר מלוכה ואת רוחה נזר תפארה ויתנו לך כתר מלוכה ויפצחו ההרים רינה ויתנו לך כתר מלוכה ידדי 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 ויצהלו אם במלכך ויתנו לך כתר מלוכה וקבלו עול מלכותך עליהם ויתנו לך כתר מלוכה ורוממוך בקלם ויתנו לך כתר מלוכה ידדי 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 וישמעו רחוקים ויבואו ויתנו לך כתר מלוכה ויתנו לך keter melucha, yadarai, 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 yadarai.
I have always thought that the most potent emotion is love. I watched my parents live a life strengthened by the intense love they had for one another. My mom lost my dad when she was just 49 and he was 53. I wondered how she would survive without his love and strength to guide and support her. I always saw my father as the strong one in their relationship. I worried about my mother, who I ever saw as the weaker of the two. As time passed, I began to realize that although I thought my mother was the weaker one in the relationship, she was the strength behind my father. He appeared to be stronger, but she was his rock. Their love for each other manifested itself as a union of blended characters and personalities. It was in depth and it was intense. Together, they were a strength to be reckoned with. It was magic to watch. From a front row seat, I saw the required work and effort it took to understand and appreciate that a marriage based on love alone is not enough to sustain the hardships and the bumpy road that life lays before us. Life challenges our passion. It takes both love and commitment to honor love and nurture it against forces that make it hard to maintain. Arnie and I are close to celebrating our 62nd wedding anniversary this coming December. By the grace of God, we have been together for 65 years. We first met when I was 15, and he was an old man approaching 19. What is the secret of being able to sustain such a long and close relationship? I am asked that question all the time. Love is the answer. Love that appreciates that it must not just take. Love that remembers that all times will not be easy. Love that realizes that we won't always see things in the same light, but that we must come to an understanding that respects the difference between us. Love that understands that as we grow, we will change, and our love has to honor and keep up with the changes. In my life, I have come to use a simple formula as my guide. As I understand it, marriage is not a 50-50 proposition. It is instead a 60-40 arrangement, with each person on the 60 ends of the equation. Our love works because we both try to give more than we take. We have made the love of our family in the center of our life. We realize that our love requires action. Love for one another is an integral part of how we function. When our children left for college, none of them returned home. Each went to another area and began to forge their lives. We were thrilled to see them each have the strength to use their own wings. Without a single word from either of us, each of our children, in their own time, informed us that they were returning to this area. What brought them back? Love did. Love for this beautiful area and the nature that abounds here. Love for one another. Passion for the value of being enriched by family. We realize that not everyone can make their lives work this way. We are very fortunate. Love has guided us, and we have guided our love. We know with certainty that we are richer for the love we have given. Love is strength. Love is its own reward. Love is the crown of our lives. Love is the sovereign force in my life. Hashana Tova, I wish you love.
There's something incredibly sweet in what Enid shared with us about having love be sovereign, and also challenging to recognize the ways in which it's work, it's effort. And I really, really appreciate that framework of it's not 50-50, it's 60-40. Everyone needs to think they're the 60%. Is a great way to go through a relationship and a really great way to go through life.
Yeah, I think this idea of partnership and community, and I'm still looking out at you, and knowing that love is so powerful and can really get us through difficult moments. And as we do this teshuvah, just feeling the love and compassion behind us as we move forward is important for me. But we're going to now go to Hayom Harat Olam, which really talks about starting over, right? This whole newness, this birth, this creating love, coming into love. I think it sort of bridges the love into this piece. So the melody is just invigorating for me, and I would like you to sing. It's on page 166. And so as we begin this, whether you know the words or not, you can nigun it and just sing with me and feel the beauty of the melody.
Kintsukuroi is the Japanese art of taking fragmented pottery and putting it back together with gold joining the pieces together. It's a form of art that takes the fractures not as flaws to be hidden, but as areas of strength and beauty once properly healed. In our own tradition, it says in the Gemara, Makom shabale tshuva omdin, tzadikim gamorin enam omdin. The place where those who have healed their broken places, who have incorporated their scars into their identity, who have overcome their struggles, those people stand in a place where those who have never struggled cannot possibly achieve. We come to the end of our cycle now. We began with Tekiah, with that sense of fullness at the very beginning or the imagined place in our life. We've moved through Shavarim, the separation from our own impulses, our ancestors. We've moved through Truah, the shattering experiences of our life. And we come now to the Tekiah Gedolah. Now you might remember that I said earlier the Tekiah Gedolah is 3 times as long as the Tekiah. The Tekiah Gedolah is long enough to incorporate all of those other parts. Tekiah, Shavarim, Teruah. Because the full Tekiah Gedolah contains all of that. In the same way, a beautiful piece of pottery contains the whole parts and the fragments as well. We come now to the end of our davening, to the end of this cycle. And I invite you to reflect on the journey you've been on, even just this morning. The journey of examining the places where we're broken and the places where we're healed, the places where we're full and the places where we hope to grow. And I invite you, and I'm entirely literal and serious about this, to stand up now and in the fullness of who you are, in your pain and in your glory, in your healthy places and in your hurting places, to let out your own untranslatable barbaric yawp and simply scream in the fullness of who you are. Let that shofar blast out from the inside of you, because who you are, everything that is awesome and everything that is flawed, everything that is healed and everything that is broken is wonderful and beautiful and worthy of celebration. So I invite you to stand up with me now and let it out. Afterward, Ellen will lead us in chanting, and when she is done, we'll hear from Ashley Baker some thoughts on what it is to integrate broken places into the fullness of our lives. Ashley is a member of BHA and our former education director, and a personal coach and consultant who lives here in Beacon with her son, Ari. Now, I invite you to stand, and with me, 1, 2, 3. Ah!
Hayom Harat עולם היום יעמיד במשפט כל יצורי עולמים כל יצורי עולמים עם כבנים עם כבדים עם כבנים רחמנו כרחמיו על בנים ואם כעבדים איננו לכל תלויות עד שתחננו עד שתחננו ותוציא כאור משפטנו היום היום קדוש ארשת שפתנו יערב לפניך אל רם ונישא מאבינו מאזין מביט ומחשיב לכל תקיעתנו ותקבל ברחמים וברצון סדר סדר שופרותינו.
Shana Tova. Lovely to be here with you all, even if we can't be together in person. Rabbi Brent, thank you for inviting me to speak about the wholeness that comes after the shattering, something I've come to know quite a bit about in the last few years. 3 years ago, just before my son turned 18 months old, and on the 5-year wedding anniversary to my high school sweetheart, my marriage abruptly ended. To say that I was devastated would be an extreme understatement. I was in total agony. I will be forever grateful to this community, BHA, for holding me in its arms through deep friendship, Shabbat dinners, the comforting sounds of davening, and simply the community life that held space for me as I put back the pieces and sorted through the broken pieces of my heart and my life and my family. One day I was at BHA and I was going through the closet, clearing things out for the renovations. And in the pile of trash, I saw an old poster that said, "There is nothing more whole than a broken heart." It was a quote by Rabbi Menachem Mendel, the Kutzker Rebbe. And I asked Rabbi Brent if I could have it. It hung on the wall of my personal sanctuary, my closet, for years as a reminder of the wholeness that would come. I remember early on during that time, a frigid, cold January morning, sitting out on the cold earth and begging Shekhinah, the divine source of feminine in the world, to make me whole again. Not knowing what that would mean, knowing that it might be painful, it would be difficult, but knowing that that's what I needed to feel whole. And that's when I began to realize what felt like missing pieces of myself, pieces I hadn't noticed were missing, the pieces of myself that I had attributed to someone else, something else outside of me. And I went inside and I made a list of all of the things that I was missing from my relationship. And in the next column, made a list of all the different ways that Shekhinah, Hashem, God, universe, humanity, whatever you want to call it, could fulfill those needs. And then I began to get to work and in partnership with the universe, with Hashem, with God, I began to find ways of finding those pieces of myself, creating that, growing those pieces within myself, and recognizing a new wholeness that wasn't there before. There was a new fullness to life, a new fullness to myself, as I found opportunities for the type of intellectual stimulation, deep connectedness, creativity. And little by little, I found myself being a new woman, very similar to who I had been before, but fuller. The pieces that felt like they were missing weren't missing anymore. There was something there that was more beautiful than what I had imagined could be. And so now, being 3 years on the other side of this, I recently actually took down that poster because I no longer needed the reminder of what I would become. Instead, I was living it every day, feeling my own fullness. And so on this Rosh Hashanah, I wish for you the same. I wish for you to know the sweetness of your fullness and that it's always there. And in those moments of hardships that are sure to come, that we see them as opportunities to grow, to connect with ourselves, to connect with community, connect with the universe, and trust that it will all be even more beautiful than we could have imagined. Thanks for being here with me, and Hag Sameach.
So, yeah, can you turn that down? That Torah that Ashley is talking about. That is the work of this, right? To be who we are, but fuller. To be who we are, but more robust. To be the best of who we are and to cultivate the best of who we are. And it's hard. And facing courageously the places where we're broken, the places where we're shattered, is the core of this work. And sometimes, like in the story that Ashley told, your world falls apart around you, right? And there's, at a certain level, no escaping it. But of course, there's always escaping it, right? There's the ability to always say, it's someone else, it's something else, the work isn't here, right? But ultimately, this is the work of tshuva, going on this journey from the fullness of Tkiya through the separation, the painful separation from our parents, from our communities of origin, from our sense of self, moving from there into Truah, into the experiences that shatter us, that break us. And these aren't sequential, right? You can be working on that separation even as you're also dealing with shattering events. But going through that cycle and coming to that place, as Ashley described it, of that Tkiya Gedolah, of that broken Japanese pottery held together with gold cement, of doing that work of tshuva and integrating all of that into who you are, which is a broken, beautiful person. The broken is a given. The beautiful is what we get for our work. So we're going to transition here a little bit. We're going to recite the Kaddish Tome, the Mortar's Kaddish. So if you are in mourning or observing a yahrzeit, mourning for someone in your life or mourning for Ruth Bader Ginsburg or somebody in our collective identity, I invite you to stand now as Cantor Ellen leads us in Kaddish Tome. And Ellen, you could say a little bit more if you'd like about why you're leading it. And then we will take things from there.
I'm leading it today. It's my mother's yahrzeit 21 years ago. And her memory is a blessing for me, as I hope that whoever you're saying Kaddish for, the memory and the imprint that they've left on your lives is a blessing for you, for all of us. Okay, so 197 Kaddish Tome. Yitgadal v'yitgadash shemei Rabbah.
Amen.
Be'alma divra chirute v'yamlich malchute b'chayechon uvyomechon ובחיי דכל בית ישראל, בעגלה ובזמן קריב, ואמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מבורך לעולם ולעלמי עלמיה. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי דקודשה בריחו לעילה לעילה מכל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה דאמירן בעלמה ואמרו אמן. יהי שלמה רבה מן שמיה וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ועל כל יושבי תבל ואמרו
Amen.
amen. May the memories of our loved ones, of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, of all who we recited for, be a blessing to each one of us.
So, let me address some practical things right now. First, I want to really deeply and sincerely thank all of the people who made this happen. The holidays at BHA are always a team effort, but this year in particular, it was beyond, I mean, really beyond anything any of us have done. So even right now, Michael Gersh, Michael Arginsky, and Faith Adams are behind the scenes making this all happen. And to put it mildly, none of this would have been happening without them.
Yes.
If it had just been me and Ellen, we'd be standing here futzing with our cell phones and nothing would be happening. So really, on behalf of the entire community, thank you, thank you, thank you. We also have all of our community Torah teachers, Donna Minkowitz, Sergio Perez, Dan Tanaka, David Ross, Christine Pincus, Karen Rosenbaum, Mark Unger, Eli Karetny, Enid Schwartz, and Ashley Baker, who shared their thoughts, their insights, and their hearts with us. Now, all of these clips are on our YouTube channel. We've gotten more technically advanced in the last 10 days than in the 10 years we've been here prior, or that I've been here prior. So,
or the 100 years.
Or in the 100 years, yeah.
For sure.
I invite you to make use of those on YouTube. If they resonate with you and you want to go back to them, you can. If you want to share them, you can. They represent a tremendous effort on the part of a lot of people, and I think I can speak for all of us to say we'd be very glad for them to be shared and be useful to other people who might be looking for ways into the work of tshuva over these holidays. We're going to transition now into the Torah service, and to make things move a little bit more smoothly on the technological front, Faith is going to send out a link into the chat right now. It's also in the emails and on the YouTube channel. It's available, but she'll also, Faith, if you would, send that link into the chat here to go to the Torah service. When we close out this meeting, this Zoom meeting in just a few minutes, you'll be able to click on that link and hear the Torah service directly, meaning it's already there on YouTube and available. And the Torah service is a combination of little summaries and spiritual exercises for each aliyah, which I offer to all of us to reflect on our own placement in the Torah. And then the chanting from people in our community, Keith Milkov and Judy Kropp and Joan Peary and all the folks who lay in Torah for this first day of Rosh Hashanah. The reading for this first day is focused on the dynamic of Abraham's family prior to the Akedah. That comes tomorrow. But today the focus is on Sarah, Hagar, Ishmael, and Isaac, and how they operate and don't operate as a family. So that will be available in that link on YouTube. And with that, we're going to close things out here. I want to thank everyone here, everyone on this call, for being part of this. This has been a huge pivot and experiment for us. And while clearly we're missing seeing you, you guys on the camera can't see it now, but Ellen and I are up here looking out into a room, which normally about this time would be packed with people. And there's only the wonderful folks who are making this happen here. And so this has been a huge experiment for us. And I hope that this has been helpful for all of you in doing your work of tshuva. I know it has been for me. And Ellen, is there anything you want to add?
I just want to send Shana Tova, Mituka, just blessings for a sweet year, and know that through this work of Teshuvah and navigating through these muddy waters of where we are, the community is really the glue that holds us together. And you all, looking at you on the screen, hold me together. And I am grateful, so grateful for almost 60 years of this community, but really sitting here, right here and now, grateful to all of you, and know that we're here for one another. So let's continue to move forward into 5781 together as community.
Shana Tova, Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.
And we'll be back here tomorrow.